My child, there is something you are still holding that was never meant to stay in your hands this long. I want to speak to it today, not with condemnation, not with impatience, not with the kind of spiritual instruction that tells you what you ought to do without acknowledging how hard the doing of it actually is. I want to speak to it with full knowledge of why you are still holding it, why letting go has felt impossible, or dangerous, or like a betrayal of something you cannot yet name, because I know why you are holding on. I know the reasons beneath the reasons, the fears beneath the fears, the logic of it that makes complete sense given everything you have been through. And I am not standing here pointing at what you are gripping and telling you to simply open your hands. I am standing here offering you something to open your hands into, which is an entirely different invitation, and I want you to feel the difference. What you are holding came from a wound. It did not begin as something you chose to carry. It began as something that was done to you, or something that happened to you, or something that accumulated in you through years of experiences that pressed themselves into your interior without your permission. The wound was real. What entered you through the wound was real. The weight of it is real. And somewhere in the process of surviving it, of building a life around it, of organizing your days and your relationships and your self-understanding in ways that accounted for its presence, the wound and the weight of it became woven into how you understand yourself, not as a foreign object inside you, but as something closer to a part of you. And that is why letting go does not feel like putting something down. It feels like losing something of yourself. It feels like the self that would exist after releasing it is a self you do not fully know yet. And the unknown self feels more frightening than the familiar self, even though the familiar self is in pain. I want to stay with that for a moment because it is one of the most important things to understand about why my children hold on to what hurts them. It is not because they enjoy the pain. It is not because they have decided that suffering is preferable to freedom. It is because the wound, having been with them long enough, has become part of the architecture of their identity. And dismantling the architecture feels like self-destruction, even when the architecture is itself what is causing the suffering. The person who has built their entire relational world around a core belief that they are not truly lovable, a belief that came from the wound, cannot simply release that belief without the entire relational structure it is organized beginning to shift. And shifting is disorienting. And disorientation feels like falling. And falling feels like the very thing they have been spending their energy to prevent. So let me say this plainly. I am not asking you to let go of everything all at once. I am not asking you to perform a single dramatic act of release that resolves in a moment what has been building for years or decades. I am asking you to consider, slowly, with me alongside you, whether what you are holding is still serving you in the way it once served you, or whether its season of service has passed and it is now costing you more than it is protecting you. I am asking you to begin to loosen, not to release completely in a moment of forced surrender, but to loosen, to soften the grip slightly, to let the possibility of release become present in your interior as a real option rather than a theoretical one. That loosening is the beginning. And I honor the beginning no matter how small it is, because here is what I want you to hold alongside this invitation. My commitment to rebuild. This is not a message that asks you to let go and then leaves you in the emptiness of what was released. The invitation to let go is inseparable from the promise to rebuild. I am not asking you to open your hands so that they will be empty. I am asking you to open your hands so that I can fill them with something that is actually meant for you. Something that fits the real shape of who you are rather than the shape of who you became in response to what wounded you. The rebuilding is already in motion. I have not been waiting passively for you to arrive at the point of release before beginning to prepare what comes after. I have been preparing it alongside the whole of your journey, and it is ready, and it is good, and it is designed with full knowledge of everything you have been through and full intention toward everything I have for you ahead. What remains after the wound has been addressed, after the grip has been loosened, after the weight has been gradually transferred from your hands to mine, is not nothing. That is one of the fears, I know. The fear that if the wound and the weight and the patterns that formed around them are released, there will not be enough left of you to constitute a self. But what remains is the truest and most essential version of you, the version that existed before the wound came, and that has persisted through everything the wound brought with it. It is still there. It has been preserved underneath everything that accumulated on top of it. And when the accumulated weight begins to lift, when the grip begins to loosen, that original self has room to breathe again, to grow again, to become more fully itself than it has been able to be, while all that weight was pressing down on it. I am for you in this, completely, specifically, personally, for you. Not for a generalized version of you that represents all wounded people everywhere, but for you in the specific shape of your specific wound, with full knowledge of what you are holding and full commitment to what comes after you release it. Let me begin to show you what letting go can look like, not as a single act, but as a journey. And let me show you what I am building in the space that the releasing creates. If these words are finding you in a place of real need today, support this ministry through the link given below. Your generosity helps carry this message to others who are holding what they were never meant to keep. I want to talk about what you are actually holding, because the invitation to let go means very little if we do not look honestly at the specific things that are being held. And I want to name some of them now, not to expose you or to make the weight feel heavier by describing it in detail, but because there is something that begins to shift when what has been unnamed is finally named, when what has been vague and atmospheric and hard to pin down is brought into enough focus to be seen clearly. The seeing is not the same as the releasing, but it is the step that comes before the releasing, and without it, the releasing tends to be incomplete, a surface clearing that leaves the deeper layers untouched because they were never brought into the light where healing can reach them. Some of what you are holding is anger. Not necessarily the hot, visible anger that announces itself, but the other kind, the slow, burning kind that has been compressed over time into something harder and denser than its original form. Anger at specific people who hurt you. Anger at systems or circumstances that did not protect you when you needed protection. Anger at yourself for choices you made from wounded places. Anger at me, perhaps, for what you experienced in seasons when my presence felt absent. This anger has not gone away simply because you have not been expressing it. It has gone inward. It has become part of the interior climate, a permanent low-grade heat that affects everything, that colors how you interpret new experiences, that makes trust more difficult and hope more costly, because the anger has learned to protect you by anticipating the next wound before it arrives. The anger was not wrong to form. It was a natural and even healthy response to real injury. But it has been serving as a bodyguard, long past the point where the immediate threat required that level of vigilance, and the bodyguard is now costing you more than the threat would. Some of what you are holding is a story about what happened to you. Not simply the memory of it, but the meaning you have made of it, the narrative you constructed around it to make sense of it, to integrate it into your understanding of yourself and the world. And that story, which was necessary when you first constructed it, because human beings need narrative to survive and to make meaning, has hardened over time into something that functions less like a story and more like a verdict. It has become the explanation for everything, the reason you cannot trust, the reason you cannot hope, the reason you cannot fully arrive in the present, because the story tells you that the present is simply the past, wearing a different face, and the outcome is already known, and it is not good. The story served you once. It is not serving you now, and part of what I am asking you to let go of is not the memory, which is yours and is real, but the verdict the story has issued about what is possible for you going forward. Some of what you are holding is the identity that formed around the wound, the identification with your pain that has become so complete that you no longer distinguish between the pain and yourself. You have become, in some internal register, the person who experienced that thing, the person who carries that wound, and while that identification carried with it a kind of dignity, a refusal to minimize what was done to you, it has also functioned as a ceiling. If the wound is who you are, then healing the wound threatens who you are. If the pain is the most true and defining thing about your story, then moving past it feels like a betrayal of the story, like pretending it did not happen, like allowing what was done to you to be dismissed. But this is a false choice. You can honor the reality of what you experienced and simultaneously refuse to let it be the last word on who you are. You can hold the wound with full acknowledgement of its reality and still open your hands to what I am placing in them. The wound is part of your story. It is not the whole of it. And I am writing chapters that the wound has no authority over. Some of what you are holding is unfulfilled longing. The longing for what the wound took from you, for what was promised and not delivered, for what should have been there and was not, for the childhood or the relationship or the version of your life that you wanted and did not have. This longing is real. And it is significant, and it deserves to be honored rather than dismissed. But longing that has nowhere to go, that has been directed at sources that cannot satisfy it, that has been waiting for specific people or specific circumstances to finally provide what was missing, is longing that is holding you in a fixed position, oriented toward a past that cannot be changed. And I want to redirect that longing, not to deny it or suppress it, but to turn it toward the one who can actually meet it, toward me, toward the relationship and the provision and the rebuilding that I am genuinely able to offer, and that the people and circumstances you have been waiting on are not able to provide. Some of what you are holding is self-protection, the particular kind of holding that is not about what was done to you, but about what you have learned to do to prevent it from happening again. The walls, the distance, the management of intimacy, the hypervigilance about the signals that have historically preceded pain, all of it held tightly in place, because releasing the protection feels like choosing to be vulnerable to the wound again, like taking down the fortifications while the threat is still present. And I understand the logic of that completely. The self-protection was wise once. It was formed in a context where it was genuinely needed. But I'm asking you to consider that the context has changed, that what served you in the environment of the original wound is not necessarily serving you in the environment you are in now, and that the cost of maintaining the full fortification in a season where it is no longer required may be greater than the risk of allowing some of it to come down. I want to speak now about why letting go has felt like a betrayal, because for many of my children, this is the deepest reason. The grip stays tight, deeper even than the fear or the anger or the identity that formed around the wound. There is a sense, often not consciously articulated but powerfully present in the interior, that releasing what wounded you is a form of disloyalty. Disloyalty to yourself, disloyalty to what you suffered, disloyalty, in some cases, to the people who suffered alongside you or because of the same wound, as though the holding on is the only remaining evidence that what happened mattered, that the pain was real, that the cost was significant, and that releasing it would be a retroactive minimization of everything it took from you. This is one of the most important things I want to address directly, because it has been keeping more of my children from healing than almost anything else. The belief that releasing the wound is the same as saying the wound did not matter. The belief that forgiving is the same as excusing. The belief that moving forward is the same as leaving behind the acknowledgement that something real and significant was done to you. And I want to say as clearly as I am able, none of those things are true. Releasing what wounded you does not erase it. It does not retroactively declare it acceptable or unimportant or without consequence. The wound was real. The damage was real. The cost was real. None of that is diminished by your healing. In fact, the opposite is true. The depth of what healing requires is itself testimony to how significant the wound was. You do not require this kind of deep and sustained work for minor inconveniences. The scale of the healing process is evidence of the scale of what you carried, not evidence that you are diminishing it. Letting go is not forgetting. I want to be very specific about that because the conflation of release with erasure is one of the primary barriers to it. Your memory of what happened is yours. Your acknowledgement of its impact is yours. Your understanding of what it cost you and what it changed in you is yours. None of that disappears when you open your hands. What disappears gradually as the grip loosens is the power of the wound to determine your present and future. The wound can remain part of your story, fully acknowledged and fully real, without remaining the operating authority over your life. Those two things are not in conflict. You can hold the memory with both honesty and peace simultaneously. Not immediately, not without the process of getting there, but that coexistence is possible, and I am moving you toward it. I also want to speak about what the holding on has been providing, because this is something that is rarely addressed honestly in conversations about release and healing, and the not addressing of it leaves people confused about why they cannot simply choose to let go even when they genuinely want to. The wound and the holding of it has been providing things that feel necessary, things that your interior genuinely needs, and has been meeting through the holding because no better source was available. And understanding what those things are is essential to the work of letting go, because you cannot release a source of provision without a replacement, and trying to do so produces not freedom but a different kind of desperation. The wound has been providing an explanation. When your life has not gone the way you hoped, when relationships have not worked the way you needed them to, when your capacity in certain areas has been limited, or your responses have been more extreme than the situation seemed to warrant, the wound has been the answer to the question of why. And having an explanation, even a painful one, is preferable to having no explanation. The wound says, this is why I am this way. This is why I respond the way I respond. This is why certain things are hard for me that seem easy for others. That explanation has dignity in it. It carries a kind of self-compassion. It says, I am not simply deficient. I am responding to something real that happened to me. And while that is true, and that self-compassion is genuinely good, the wound has also sometimes been used as a permanent explanation in situations where healing would have made the explanation unnecessary, and the not wanting to lose the explanation has kept the wound in place longer than it needed to stay. The wound has been providing a boundary. When you do not want to go somewhere emotionally or relationally, when intimacy feels threatening or vulnerability feels unsafe, the wound provides a reason to stay back that requires no further justification. I cannot go there. I have been hurt. The protection of the wound, its capacity to explain and justify distance, has been serving a genuine function in keeping you safe from what felt like more danger than you could manage. And I am not dismissing that function. I am acknowledging it as real and as something that served a real purpose. But I'm also asking you to consider whether the same boundary that was genuinely protective in one season has become unnecessarily restrictive in another. Whether the wound is now preventing access to things that would be genuinely good for you, genuinely safe, genuinely nourishing, and whether the cost of maintaining it as a permanent boundary is higher than the risk it is protecting you from. The wound has been providing community. This one is rarely spoken about, and I want to name it honestly. There are people in your life whose connection with you is organized around the shared experience of the wound, around the mutual holding of it, around the identity of being someone who has been through what you have been through. And the prospect of healing, of releasing the wound, can feel like a threat to that community, like moving into a different country where the shared language of the wound no longer applies, and you do not know who you will be to those people or who they will be to you on the other side. That fear is real, and the connection it is protecting is real. I am not asking you to abandon the people who have witnessed your pain. I am asking you to trust that genuine connection can survive and deepen through healing, that the people who truly love you will celebrate your release rather than mourning the wound that is no longer organizing your shared life. What I am offering to replace all of these things that the wound has been providing is not nothing. It is myself. The explanation I offer is not the wound, but the truth of who I made you to be and the story I am writing through your life. The boundary I offer is not fear, but wisdom, not the reflexive distance of the wounded, but the discerning presence of the healed. The community I offer is not organized around shared pain, but around shared life. The kind of connection that can hold both what was hard and what is becoming good. I am not taking away provision. I am offering better provision. And the better provision is real, and it is available, and it is waiting for the hands that are willing to open. There is a question underneath the holding that I want to bring to the surface now, because it is one of the most significant drivers of why the grip stays tight, even when the person holding it genuinely desires to be free. The question is this: who am I without this? Not as a philosophical inquiry, but as a visceral fear, a deep interior uncertainty about what remains when the wound and the weight and the patterns that formed around them are finally released. Because you have been living with this for so long that it has become part of how you know yourself, part of your internal reference points, part of the way you navigate the world and make sense of your experiences and understand your own responses. And the self that exists without it is genuinely unknown to you. You have not been that self in a very long time, perhaps not since before the wound first came, and the prospect of becoming someone you do not fully recognize is frightening, even when the someone you currently are is in pain. I want to speak directly to that fear, because it is real, and it deserves a real response rather than a dismissal. The fear of the unknown self is not irrational. It is the natural response of a person who has organized their entire interior life around a particular wound for a significant period of time, and who is now being invited to reorganize around something else entirely. Of course that feels disorienting. Of course the unfamiliar feels threatening. Of course the question of who you will be without the wound raises a genuine uncertainty that your mind reaches to resolve and cannot, because the answer to who you will be on the other side of healing is not fully available to you on this side of it. You cannot see the person you are becoming from the vantage point of the person you currently are. The becoming happens in the process, not before it. But here is what I can tell you about that unknown self, because I know them already. I am not speaking into uncertainty when I describe who you are becoming. I can see the full arc of it from where I stand, and I want to give you a picture of what I see that you can hold as something to move toward rather than something to fear. The self on the other side of releasing this wound is not a stranger. They are not a foreign person with no connection to who you are now. They are the continuation of the truest things about you, the things that survived the wound and have been present underneath the weight of it all along. They are the you that existed before the wound first came. Now with the depth and the wisdom and the hard-won understanding that the years of carrying it have produced. Not undamaged, because the wound was real and it left marks, but not defined by the damage either. Marked by it, yes. Shaped by it, yes. But not imprisoned by it. Not organized primarily around it. Not required to carry it as the central weight of their existence. The self that emerges through the releasing is someone who knows what they know about pain and suffering from the inside, who carries that knowing as a form of depth rather than a source of limitation. They have been somewhere that has given them access to a quality of understanding and compassion that people who have not been there cannot fully replicate. They know the texture of the valley from having walked through it, and that knowing is not taken from them by the healing. It is transformed from a wound into a gift, from something that has been happening to them into something they now carry for the sake of others. The wound, released from the grip of being your primary identity, does not disappear. It becomes useful. It becomes the thing that makes you able to sit with people in their darkest places and not flinch, because you have been in the dark and you know it does not have to be permanent. And that knowing is worth something that no other kind of knowing can replicate. The self on the other side of this is also someone who is capable of a quality of joy that has not been fully available to you while the wound was the dominant interior reality. Not the absence of difficulty, not a naive happiness that has no relationship with what is real, but the genuine joy of a person who has been through something genuinely hard and has come out the other side with a capacity for gratitude and delight that is proportional to how long they went without it. The things that have felt dull or distant or inaccessible to you during the seasons of deepest carrying will regain their color. The capacity for genuine pleasure in small things, for real laughter that is not performing lightness, but actually feeling it, for being fully present in a beautiful moment without the undercurrent of the wound pulling your attention back into its gravity, all of that returns. Not all at once, not without the process, but it returns. I have seen it return in person after person who has walked the road we are walking together, and I am telling you, it is real, it is worth the journey, and it is waiting for you. And the self, on the other side of this, is someone who has a relationship with me that is qualitatively different from the relationship that exists when the wound is the primary interior reality. Because right now, even when you come to me, you come carrying the full weight of the wound, and the weight colors the interaction, colors what you are able to receive from me, colors what you believe is possible in our relationship. On the other side of releasing it, the interior space that the wound has been occupying becomes available for something else, for the kind of deep and settled connection with me that has not been fully accessible while so much of the interior bandwidth was consumed by the weight of the carrying. The relationship becomes quieter, more steady, less desperate, and more rested. The difference between coming to me as someone drowning who needs rescue and coming to me as someone walking who wants companionship. Both are welcome, but only one of them is free. I want you to begin to let that unknown self become something you are curious about rather than afraid of. Not yet moving toward it, perhaps, but simply beginning to hold the possibility of it with something other than dread. Beginning to let the question shift from who will I be without this, asked with fear, to who will I be without this, asked with genuine wondering. That shift from fear to curiosity is significant. It is the beginning of the orientation changing, and I will meet you in the curiosity, and I will begin to show you in small glimpses what I already see when I look at the self that is being formed through this healing. Let me show you. Let the showing be the invitation forward. I want to talk about the specific moment of letting go, not as a single dramatic event, but as something that happens in layers, because understanding what the actual process looks like may make it feel more accessible than the version of it that exists in your imagination. The version in your imagination may look like a sudden, complete release, a moment after which everything is different, a line crossed after which the wound no longer has any hold. And while there are moments of significant breakthrough in healing, the daily texture of letting go is quieter than that and more gradual and more human, and I want to describe it accurately so that when you experience it, you recognize it as the real thing, rather than dismissing it because it did not arrive in the dramatic form you were expecting. The first layer of letting go is the decision to stop feeding the wound, not the wound itself, which was done to you and is not your fault, but the ongoing rehearsal of it that keeps it active in your interior. Every time you replay the memory with the same emotional intensity as when it first happened, you are feeding it. Every time you tell the story of what was done to you in a way that is primarily oriented toward keeping the injustice alive rather than processing it toward release, you are feeding it. Every time you interpret a new experience through the lens of the old wound, assuming the worst, because the worst has happened before, you are feeding it. I am not asking you to pretend the wound did not happen. I am asking you to notice when you are actively rehearsing it and to begin, gently and without judgment, to choose not to continue the rehearsal, to let the thought arise and not follow it down the familiar path it has worn into your interior, to let the memory be present without making it the center of the room again. This is small and it is unglamorous, and it is the real beginning of letting go. The second layer is the decision to stop building your future around the wound. This is subtler and harder to notice because it operates in the planning rather than in the feeling. It looks like not applying for the opportunity because the wound says you will fail. It looks like not attempting the connection because the wound says you will be rejected. It looks like not allowing yourself to hope for certain things because the wound says hope in those areas is not safe for you. The wound has been making decisions about your future from the past, and those decisions have been limiting the territory of your life without your conscious agreement. Beginning to catch those decisions, to notice when the wound is the author of a choice rather than your genuine self, and to ask whether you want to make the same choice from a different source is the second layer of the releasing. The third layer is bringing the wound, specifically and honestly, to me. To me. Not the generalized pain, not a vague acknowledgement that you have been hurt, but the specific thing, the specific person, the specific event or pattern or season, the specific cost. Bringing it in all its detail, without the softening and the hedging and the theological reframing that you sometimes use to make it seem more acceptable before presenting it to me, as though I need you to have already made peace with it before I will receive it. Bring it raw. Bring it in the form it actually exists in your interior, with the anger still in it, and the grief still in it, and the confusion still in it. And let me hold it with you. Let me be the witness to it that it has needed. Let me be present with the full unedited reality of what was done and what it cost. The bringing is itself a form of releasing, because what is held in secret, in the dark of the interior, maintains a kind of power that it loses when it is brought into the light of genuine, honest encounter with me. The fourth layer is the practice of receiving what I give back in exchange for what you bring. Because the exchange is real. When you bring me the wound in its honesty, I do not simply receive it and leave you empty-handed. I give back truth in the place of the lie the wound installed. I give back my perspective on who you are in the place of the wound's verdict. I give back the specific quality of comfort and solidarity that only I can offer, which is not the comfort of someone who is trying to make you feel better from the outside, but the comfort of someone who is present for every moment of what you experienced and who grieves it with you and who has authority over what it becomes in your life. The receiving requires practice because the wounded interior has learned to deflect what is offered, to accept it on the surface while not allowing it to land in the deep place where it is actually needed. Practicing the receiving means slowing down when something true arrives, letting it sit, letting it go deeper than the surface, letting it reach for the root of the wound, rather than being satisfied with landing in the shallows. These 4 layers, repeated, returned to, practiced imperfectly and persistently, are what the real process of letting go looks like in the texture of daily life. Not dramatic, not complete in a single encounter, but real and cumulatively over time genuinely transformative. I want to talk about the rebuilding now, because you need to know what I am building before you can fully trust the process of releasing what is in the way of it. The letting go and the rebuilding are not sequential, as though first you release everything and then I begin construction. They are simultaneous. Every time you loosen your grip on some portion of what you have been holding, I am already at work in the space that the loosening creates. I am not waiting for the demolition to be complete before I begin. I am building even now, in the partial openings, in the small moments of release, in the days when you are more willing than usual to let me in. The rebuilding has already begun. I want you to know what it looks like so you can begin to recognize it when you see it. Because what I build does not always look like what you might expect. And without knowing what to look for, you may be living in the middle of the rebuilding and not seeing it as such. The first thing I rebuild is foundation, not the surface things, not the visible parts of your life that others can see and assess, but the deep interior foundation, the core beliefs about who you are and what is possible for you, and whether you are safe, and whether you are loved, and whether the future holds something worth moving toward. These foundational beliefs were damaged by the wound, and in some cases they were laid incorrectly from the very beginning by people who were themselves building on damaged foundations. And I go all the way down. I do not simply patch the surface. I do not reinforce what is structurally unsound and call it repaired. I reach to the lowest layer of your interior architecture, and I begin placing what should have been there from the start, the unshakable knowledge of your worth, the settled certainty of my love, the deep assurance that you are not alone, The foundational truth that you were made with purpose and for goodness, and that nothing that has happened to you has changed what I intended for you when I formed you. This foundational work is invisible for a long time. You may not feel it happening, but one day you will find yourself responding to a difficult situation with a stability that surprises you, holding your ground in a place where you would previously have collapsed, and that stability will be the evidence of what I have been building underneath. The second thing I rebuild is capacity. The wound reduced your capacity in specific ways, narrowed the range of what felt safe to experience or express or attempt or hope for. The rebuilding expands that range again. Capacity for genuine intimacy, for letting yourself be fully known without the reflexive management of what is revealed. Capacity for hope, for allowing yourself to want things and to believe they are possible, for holding expectations without immediately armoring yourself against their disappointment. Capacity for joy, the full, unguarded kind that does not have the wound's voice running underneath it, whispering that this will not last. Capacity for trust, not the naive trust of someone who has not been hurt, but the chosen trust of someone who knows the risk and decides that the connection is worth it, that I am worth it, that the specific people I am placing in their life are worth the risk. This expanded capacity does not arrive all at once. It comes in small increases, each one feeling slightly more than what was available the season before, and the accumulation of small increases produces a life that looks and feels fundamentally different from the one that was organized around the wound's limitations. The third thing I rebuild is your relationship with time. The wound distorted your relationship with time in particular ways. It kept you anchored to the past, returning to it, living partly in it even while physically present in the current moment. It made the future feel dangerous or inaccessible or predetermined by the pattern of what has already happened. It made the present feel thin, a temporary surface between the past that hurt and the future that might hurt. Not a place to fully inhabit, but a place to pass through carefully. The rebuilding restores a healthy relationship with all three dimensions. The past becomes something you can look at honestly without being pulled back into it, something that is part of your story without being the operating center of your present. The future becomes something you can move toward with genuine anticipation rather than braced dread. The present becomes the primary place you live, the place where I am, the place where the real texture of your life is actually happening, the place worth being fully present in rather than only partially here, while some portion of your attention is always somewhere else. The fourth thing I rebuild is your relationship with yourself. The wound taught you to relate to yourself with the critical eye of whoever or whatever wounded you, to see yourself through their distorted lens rather than through mine. The rebuilding is a re-education in self-perception, a gradual replacement of the inner critic that speaks in the voice of the wound with the inner witness that speaks in my voice. Not the voice that pretends everything is fine when it is not. Not the voice that flatters and avoids honest assessment, but the voice that sees you clearly and speaks about what it sees with the same combination of honesty and love that I bring to all of my knowing of you. The rebuilding of your relationship with yourself is perhaps the quietest and most personal dimension of the whole work, because it happens in the interior conversations you have with yourself throughout every day, in the commentary that runs beneath the surface of your public life, in the judgments you make about your own worth and adequacy and belovedness. And as that inner commentary is gradually reformed, as the wound's voice is progressively replaced by mine, the quality of your daily interior life changes in ways that affect everything else. This is what I am building. Foundation, capacity, relationship with time, relationship with yourself. Not a life without difficulty or pain or the ongoing need for me, but a life built on what is true and solid and oriented toward what I have always intended for you. And it is worth what the releasing costs. I want to say that plainly because I want you to know that I am not asking you to pay a price for nothing. The releasing is costly. The process is real and sometimes painful. But what is being built on the other side of it is worth the cost. I have seen the end of this from the beginning, and what I see there is good. I need to talk about grief now, because there is a dimension of letting go that is almost always skipped over in the rush toward release and healing, and the skipping of it tends to make the releasing incomplete. That dimension is grief, real, honest, unhurried grief for what the wound took from you. Not the grief of despair, not the grief that says this loss is permanent and nothing good will come after it, but the grief that simply acknowledges something real was lost here. Something that mattered was taken. Something that should have been present was absent. And that loss deserves to be mourned, not bypassed in the name of healing, not hurried past in the name of faith, not spiritually reframed into something positive before the reality of the loss has been fully honored. The reason grief is so essential to the releasing is that you cannot truly let go of something you have not genuinely mourned. When something is lost without being mourned, it does not simply disappear from the interior. It goes underground. It becomes a kind of frozen grief that settles into the body and the psyche and continues to exert its weight without being identified as grief, because the grief never had its season. And the holding on that we have been talking about throughout this message is very often not a holding on to the wound itself, but a holding on to the unmourned loss that lives at the center of the wound. The grip is tight, not because you want to remain in pain, but because releasing the pain would require you to finally feel the full weight of what was taken. And that feeling is something you have been managing around for a long time. What needs to be grieved is specific, and I want to help you name some of it. There is the grief of the safety you deserved and did not have. The grief of the childhood or the relationship or the season that should have been a place of refuge and was instead a place of harm or absence or confusion. That specific loss, the loss of what should have been, deserves to be mourned. Not forever, not in a way that keeps you permanently oriented toward what was missing, but genuinely, with full acknowledgement that you deserved better and did not receive it, and that the gap between what you deserved and what you received was real and significant and worth grieving. There is the grief of the person you were before the wound came. Some of you remember a version of yourself that was more open, more trusting, more willing to be fully present and fully known. A version that existed before the wound taught you that those qualities were liabilities. That earlier self was not naive. They were simply not yet wounded, and the wound that came changed something in you that has not returned to what it was. And there is genuine loss in that change, genuine loss in the parts of yourself that went quiet, or went protective, or went underground in response to what happened. Grieve that person. Honor what was there before. Give the loss of that openness the acknowledgement it deserves before you move toward the new openness that the healing is creating. There is the grief of the relationships that did not survive the wound, the connections that were lost because the wound changed you in ways that made certain relationships impossible, or because the wound came directly from a relationship that had to be ended or distanced from for your own safety. Those lost connections are real losses even when they were necessary ones. Even when the relationship that ended was harmful, there is grief in the ending. There is grief in the version of that relationship that could have been if the harm had not been present. There is grief in the hope that was attached to that connection and that was disappointed. Let yourself grieve the loss without requiring the grief to include a verdict on whether the ending was right. The grief and the rightness of the ending can coexist. There is the grief of the time, the years that were spent inside the wound rather than in the freedom that healing would have brought, the experiences that were missed or diminished because the weight of carrying the wound was consuming the energy that would have been available for them. The relationships that were conducted at a distance because the wound made full presence feel unsafe. The joy that was partial or absent because the wound was the primary interior reality. Grieving the lost time is not wallowing. It is honest acknowledgement, and it can coexist with the truth that I waste nothing, that even the years inside the wound were being used and shaped and made into something, because the coexistence of both truths is more honest than choosing only one of them. And here is what I want you to know about grieving with me. I do not hurry it. I do not sit with you in your grief, looking at my watch and wondering when you will be ready to move on. I do not have a quota of tears, after which I expect you to be finished. I sit with you in the grief for as long as the grief needs to be sat with, because I understand what was lost, and I do not minimize it, and I know that rushing past genuine grief does not heal the wound. It only drives the grief underground, where it continues to operate without being identified or addressed. Grieve in my presence. Let the loss be fully felt in the safest possible context, which is here, with me, where nothing you feel will be used against you, and nothing you mourn will be treated as excessive. Let it come. Let it be what it is, and let me be present in it with you, not as someone waiting for it to end, but as someone who is honored to witness it, who considers the grief of my children something worth staying present for, something that matters to me as much as the joy that comes after it. The grief is not the opposite of healing. It is part of it. It is the mourning that makes the releasing genuinely possible, the honoring of what was lost that allows you to finally open your hands, not because the loss did not matter, but because it has been fully acknowledged and fully felt and fully witnessed, and you are now ready, in a way you were not ready before the grieving, to move toward what I am building in its place. I need to speak about trust, because everything I am describing in this message, the releasing, the grieving, the opening of the hands, the receiving of what I am building, all of it requires a degree of trust that may feel unavailable to you right now. And I want to address that directly, rather than proceeding as though trust is simply a given, as though the invitation to let go and let me rebuild is an easy one to accept for someone whose trust has been damaged by the very wound they are being asked to release. Because for many of my children, the wound did not only damage specific areas of their inner life, it damaged their capacity to trust altogether. It taught them, at a deep experiential level, that opening up leads to being hurt, that vulnerability is dangerous, that the people and the systems, and perhaps even the God they trusted, were not trustworthy in the way they needed them to be. And now I am standing here asking for trust, and the very faculty I am asking you to use is one that was broken by what happened to you. I want to begin by acknowledging the legitimacy of the broken trust. It did not break because you were weak, or faithless, or spiritually immature. It broke because things happened that were genuinely untrustworthy, because people who held your trust handled it carelessly or harmfully, because expectations that were reasonable were not met, because the world demonstrated in concrete ways that it was not always safe. The broken trust is an honest response to dishonest or harmful treatment, and I am not asking you to pretend that the experiences that broke it did not happen or were not as damaging as they were. I am asking you to consider whether the trustworthiness of those people or those circumstances is an accurate measure of my trustworthiness. Because it is not. And I understand why the damage to one has colored your relationship with the other. I understand why a heart that has been hurt by people in authority over it reaches that hurt into its relationship with me. But I want to make the case, carefully and without demanding that you simply take my word for it, that I am different from what hurt you, that my character is not the character of what wounded you, and that the trust I am asking for can be tested safely in a way that the trust that was broken could not have been. Here is what I want to offer you. Instead of simply asking for trust, I want to offer you the opportunity to test me in small things first. I am not asking for the full surrender of everything all at once. I am not asking you to open your hands completely and immediately and trust that I will catch everything that falls. I am asking you to release one small thing, something at the edge of what you are holding rather than at the center, and to watch what I do with it. To bring me one honest thing, one piece of the wound, or the grief, or the anger, something manageable and not the most tender thing, and to observe whether I handle it the way the things that broke your trust were handled, or whether I handle it differently. To let the evidence accumulate through small repeated experiments in trusting, rather than requiring yourself to arrive at full trust before you have any evidence that it is warranted. And I want to tell you what you will find when you run those experiments. You will find that I receive what you bring without using it against you. That I do not take your vulnerability and turn it into leverage. That I do not respond to your honest grief or anger or confusion with impatience or withdrawal or the subtle punishment that taught you to hide your true interior from the people around you. You will find that when you bring me something real, the quality of what comes back is different from what the wound taught you to expect. Not always in dramatic or unmistakable ways. Sometimes in very quiet ways. A sense of being held that is slightly more present than before. A thought that arrives with a quality of gentleness and accuracy that distinguishes it from your own internal voice. A moment of unexpected peace in the middle of a situation that should be producing anxiety. A small and specific thing that functions as a sign, as evidence that I was listening, that I am here, that the bringing was not into a void. I also want to address the specific way the wound may have damaged your ability to trust me. If what wounded you was connected to faith, to a church or a religious context, or the people who represented me to you in some authority capacity, then the damage to your trust in those things has very naturally and very understandably reached into your trust in me. When the people who spoke for me failed you, when the institution that was supposed to embody my care harmed you or dismissed you or used its authority against you, the message that landed, however unintentionally, was that I could not be trusted either. And I want to say clearly, the failure of those people and those institutions was not my will and was not my character. What was done to you in my name or in religious contexts was not what I would have done. My character is not determined by the character of those who have claimed to represent me. And I am not asking you to return to the context that hurt you or to restore trust in the people or institutions that broke it. I am asking you to consider whether you are willing to give me a direct encounter, unmediated by the people who failed you, unfiltered by the damage their failures caused, a fresh and personal and direct experience of who I actually am in relationship with you. That encounter is available. It does not require the intermediaries who hurt you. It requires only your willingness to bring something honest and to wait and to watch. Trust that has been rebuilt through testing is stronger than trust that was never broken. Because it is no longer naive. It is no longer the trust of someone who has not yet discovered what betrayal feels like. It is the trust of someone who knows what betrayal feels like and who has chosen, with full knowledge of that risk, to trust anyway, because the evidence gathered through the small experiments has been sufficient to warrant the choice. That kind of trust is not fragile. It has been forged, and a forged trust that comes through the rebuilding process is one of the most significant things I am constructing in the space that the wound is releasing. Not the restoration of what was broken, something stronger than what was there before. I want to speak now about the body, because the releasing we are talking about is not only a spiritual and emotional event, it is a physical one, and the body has been carrying the wound alongside the soul and the mind, often in ways that have not been fully connected to the emotional reality that produced them. The body keeps its own record. It holds what the mind has not yet processed. It carries in its tissues, in its nervous system, in its physical patterns, what the interior has been unable to fully integrate and release. And the work of letting go is incomplete if it addresses only the spiritual and emotional dimensions and leaves the body still holding what it has been given to carry. You know this already, even if you have not articulated it in these terms. You know it in the chronic tension that lives in specific places in your body, the shoulders that have been carrying the weight of the world, the chest that tightens when certain subjects arise, the jaw that clenches without your noticing, the stomach that contracts in certain relational contexts, the back that has been bearing what should not have been placed on it. You know it in the fatigue that does not respond to sleep, the kind of tired that is not about physical depletion, but about the ongoing expenditure of energy, required to hold something heavy in the interior, while simultaneously managing its concealment from the world around you. You know it in the headaches and the tension and the physical symptoms that medicine has addressed at the surface without reaching the source, because the source is not primarily physical, even though it has produced physical effects. The body is not a passive container that simply waits while the healing happens elsewhere and then enjoys the benefits afterward. The body participates in the healing. And part of letting go involves specifically allowing the body to release what it has been holding, which is a different kind of work than the intellectual and spiritual work of the releasing, and which requires a different kind of attention. The body releases through movement, through breath, through rest, that is genuinely restful rather than merely inactive, through the physical experience of safety in the present moment, through being allowed to feel what it has been feeling without the suppression that has been keeping the physical symptoms of the wound in place, rather than allowing them to move through and out. I want to say something about breath specifically, because breath is the most immediate and most accessible bridge between the physical and the emotional, and because the wound has almost certainly affected the way you breathe in, ways you may not have fully noticed. The shallow breathing that characterizes anxiety and braced anticipation, the held breath that accompanies dread, the rapid breathing that attends the resurfacing of traumatic memory, the suppressed breathing that keeps feeling from rising into full awareness. All of these are ways the body has been participating in the management of the wound. And the simple act of choosing to breathe differently, to take slow and full breaths that reach into the lower body rather than staying in the chest, to exhale completely rather than holding the breath somewhere between inhale and exhale, is not a trivial thing. It is a physical communication to the nervous system that the immediate threat has passed, that it is safe to release the bracing, that the body can begin to let down from the state of alert that the wound has kept it in. Breathe. Let the breath go all the way down. Let the exhale be complete. This is not a technique. It is the body beginning to practice what the spirit is being invited into, the releasing of what has been held too tightly for too long. I also want to speak about rest, because the body that has been carrying the wound has not been able to rest in the way that rest was designed to work. True rest is not merely the absence of activity. It is the full releasing of the vigilance that the wound requires, the letting down of the guard, the permission for the interior to go genuinely quiet, rather than maintaining its surveillance, even through the hours of apparent sleep. And for many of my children who carry deep wounds, true rest has been unavailable for a very long time, because the nervous system that has learned to stay alert against the return of the wound does not simply switch off when the body goes horizontal. It maintains its watch. It processes threat at reduced levels rather than releasing the processing entirely. And the result is a fatigue that sleep does not cure, because what is needed is not more sleep, but a genuine interior quieting that the wound has been preventing. The releasing of the wound as it progresses changes the quality of rest available to you. As the things you have been holding loosen their grip and are gradually transferred into my hands, the nervous system begins to receive a different signal, the signal that the threat has passed, that the weight is no longer yours to carry alone, that the vigilance that was necessary in the season of the wound is no longer required at the same intensity in the season of the healing. And in response to that signal, the body begins, slowly and incrementally, to do something it has not been able to fully do in a long time. It begins to actually rest, not the performance of rest, not the lying down while the mind continues its work, but the genuine descent into restoration that the body was designed for, the deep physical renewal that is available to a person who has put down what they were carrying and trusted that it will be held while they sleep. I made your body. I understand its role in the wound and in the healing. I am not asking you to transcend the physical in order to access the healing I am offering. I am reaching into the physical as well as the spiritual and emotional dimensions of this, because my healing is not partial. It does not address the soul while leaving the body still contracted around the old weight. It reaches the whole of you, every layer, every system, every place where the wound left its mark. Let your body participate in the releasing. Let it breathe. Let it soften. Let it receive the signal that something is changing, that the weight is being transferred, that the long-held bracing can begin to ease. The body will respond. It knows how to release when it is given permission. Give it permission. There are specific people behind what you are holding. I want to speak to that directly now, because the wound did not arrive in the abstract. It came through people, specific people with faces and names and histories that you know, people whose presence or absence or particular way of engaging with you left specific marks on your interior. And the work of releasing what wounded you cannot be complete without addressing those specific people, without bringing the specific faces and the specific things they did or failed to do into the honest light of what we are doing together here. Because as long as they remain unnamed and unaddressed in the interior of this process, the releasing tends to happen around them rather than through them, addressing the general wound while leaving the specific source of it still lodged in place. I am not going to name them because only you know who they are. But I want to create space for you to name them to yourself right now, even just internally, even just in the quiet of your own awareness as you receive these words. The person who was supposed to protect you and did not. The person who was supposed to love you consistently and instead loved you conditionally or inconsistently or not at all. The person who said something that went into you like a blade and has been lodged there ever since, perhaps without their even knowing what they did. The person who left when you needed them to stay. The person who stayed when their staying was harmful. The person who knew and said nothing. The person who did not know because you could not tell them, and the not being able to tell was itself a wound. The person who was supposed to be safe and was not. The person who took something from you that they had no right to take. Let their faces be present in your awareness for a moment, not to rehearse the injury, not to reopen what is beginning to close, but to bring them specifically into the space of this releasing. Because releasing the wound in general while avoiding the specific people attached to it is like trying to remove a splinter without identifying exactly where it is. The specificity is what allows the releasing to actually reach the thing it needs to reach. And now I want to say something about these specific people. Something that is important and that needs to be heard clearly in order for the releasing of them to be possible. Most of them wounded you from their own wounds. Most of them did what they did from a place of damage in themselves that had nothing to do with your worth or your value or what you deserved. This is not an excuse for what they did. It does not erase the impact of it or make it acceptable or require you to minimize the harm it caused. But it is a truth that matters for the releasing, because a wound that came from someone else's brokenness is a different kind of thing to hold than a wound that was a deliberate and informed verdict on who you are. The parent who could not give you what you needed was operating from the limits of what they had received and what they were capable of. The person who hurt you was likely carrying their own unexplained wound and passing forward in the only ways they knew what had been done to them. Again, this does not make it acceptable, but it does make it something you might be able to set down rather than something you must carry forever as the sentence that was passed on your worth. There are others, perhaps, where the wounding was more deliberate, more aware, less excusable by the limits of their own damage. People who chose to harm. People who knew better and did it anyway. People whose actions cannot be fully explained by their own woundedness without remainder. For those people, the releasing is harder, and I will not pretend it is not. Releasing the deliberate wound is a more costly act than releasing the unintentional one, and it requires more of you. And I am not asking you to perform a release that is not real. I am asking you to bring the full weight of what those people did, the intentional harm and its cost, and to place it in my hands rather than continuing to carry it in yours. Not for their sake, not because they deserve to be released from the account, but because you deserve to be free from the weight of being the one who holds it. The account belongs with me. The justice belongs with me. And my handling of it, in my time and in my way, will be more complete and more accurate than anything your continued holding of it can produce. What does releasing a specific person actually look like in practice? It looks like a moment, imperfect and possibly needing to be repeated, where you bring their face to me and you say something honest, not the theological formula of forgiveness that you have perhaps attempted before without it fully landing. Something honest, something like, I am tired of carrying what this person did. I cannot hold it anymore without it costing me more than it is worth. I do not want to carry their wrong as though it were mine. I am placing it in your hands. I cannot make it not have happened. I cannot make it not have hurt. But I am choosing to release my grip on the accounting of it and to trust you with what happens next. That is enough. That is a real releasing. And you may need to return to it, to repeat it as new layers surface, to bring the same face back to me when the anger or the grief about what they did rises again. Each returning is not evidence that the previous releasing failed. It is evidence that the wound had more layers than one releasing could exhaust, and that you are willing to keep going deeper, and that the willingness itself is the most important thing. Support this ministry through the link given below. These words are for the person who is ready to open their hands, and your generosity helps them be found. I want to address a fear that is present in almost everyone who arrives at this point in the process of releasing, a fear that is legitimate and that deserves a real response rather than a dismissal. The fear is this: if I let go of what has been protecting me, if I open my hands and release the wound and the weight and the walls that formed around them, what is to prevent me from being wounded again? In exactly the same way, the protection I have been carrying, however costly, has been doing something. It has been keeping certain things out, and if I dismantle the protection in the name of healing, am I not simply making myself available to be hurt again, returning to the vulnerability that made the original wound possible? This fear is not irrational. It is the honest question of a person who has learned from experience that openness without discernment can lead to harm. And I want to answer it honestly rather than spiritually bypassing it with reassurances that nothing bad will ever happen to you again, because that is not what I am promising, and it would not be true, and you would feel the dishonesty of it immediately. What I am promising is something different and something more useful, not that you will never be hurt again, but that the hurt, if it comes, will find a different version of you than it found before. One who is more rooted. One who knows more clearly who they are. One who has a relationship with me that is steady enough to sustain them through difficulty without being devastated by it. One who has the discernment to distinguish between situations that require protection and situations that are genuinely safe, rather than applying maximum protection to everything because the wound made it impossible to tell the difference. The wound, while it was the dominant interior reality, did not actually make you safer from future wounding. It made you less able to distinguish between genuine threats and safe situations because it was applying its protective logic to everything regardless of actual danger. The hypervigilance that the wound produces is not an accurate threat detection system. It is a maximum alert system that is calibrated to the specific environment where the wound first occurred and that applies that calibration universally, treating situations that are actually safe as though they carry the same danger as the original wound. And this means that in some of the most important areas of your life, the areas where genuine connection and genuine healing and genuine flourishing are available, the wound's protection has been keeping you out. It has been excluding the good along with the harmful, because it cannot tell the difference between them. What I am rebuilding in you as the wound releases includes something that might be called wise discernment, not the reflexive protection that keeps everything out equally, not the naive openness of someone who has never been hurt, but the developed capacity to assess situations and people and relationships with increasing accuracy, to distinguish between those that carry genuine risk and those that are genuinely safe, to be open where openness is warranted and boundaried where boundaries are needed, from a place of clear seeing rather than from the distorted lens of the unhealed wound. This discernment is one of the gifts that healing produces that was not available before the healing, because it requires both the depth of experience that the wound provides and the clarity of perception that only healing restores. I also want to say this. The releasing I am asking for is not the removal of all boundaries. Boundaries are not the same as walls. Walls are indiscriminate. They keep everything out, good and harmful alike. And they require constant maintenance, and they prevent the very connection that your heart is longing for. Boundaries are discerning. They are specific to the situation and the person and the level of trust that has been established. They can be adjusted as trust is built or as it is broken. They are responsive rather than fixed. And the healing I am doing in you is moving you from walls, which are the wound's form of protection, toward boundaries, which are the healed self's form of wisdom. That movement does not leave you unprotected. It leaves you protected in a way that is more effective and less costly than what the wound was providing. And there is one more thing I want to say about the fear of being rewounded. It is this: if you are rewounded, I will be there. I will not leave you to navigate the new wound alone in the way you navigated the original one. The relationship we are building through this process of releasing and healing is not only for the good seasons. It is the foundation for all seasons, including the ones where new difficulty arrives. You are not healing into a life where difficulty is absent. You are healing into a life where difficulty is not navigated alone, where the resources available to you in hard times include a stable interior foundation and a direct and trusted relationship with me, and the wisdom that comes from having already come through something genuinely hard. That is not a small thing. That is a qualitatively different kind of resilience than the brittle self-protection the wound was providing, and it is worth the vulnerability required to arrive at it. Let the fear of being rewounded be present. Bring it to me. Let it be acknowledged rather than suppressed, and then let me speak into it what I have just spoken. The truth that the releasing is not a removal of protection, but a replacement of it with something wiser and more effective and less costly and more able to coexist with the genuine connection your heart has been longing for. The new protection is better than what you are holding. I promise you that. And my promises do not expire. I want to make an important distinction now, because the invitation to let go of what wounded you can be misheard as an invitation to let go of everything that the wound produced, and that is not what I am asking. Not everything that came from the wound needs to be released. Some of what the wound produced in you is genuinely valuable, genuinely yours, genuinely part of who I am making you to be, and releasing it would not be healing, but loss. And I want to help you distinguish between what needs to go and what needs to be kept, because the discernment between those two things is itself part of the wisdom that the healing produces. What needs to go is the pain that is still active, still organizing your present around the past, still producing the weight and the limitation and the defensive patterns that are costing you more than they are giving you. What needs to go is the false belief that the wound installed about your worth and your lovability and your safety. What needs to go is the anger that is curdled into bitterness, the grief that is settled into despair, the longing that is hardened into resentment. What needs to go is the protection that has become a prison, the walls that are keeping out the harmful and the good with equal indiscrimination. What needs to go is the identity that is organized primarily around the wound, the self-understanding that makes the pain the central and defining fact of who you are. These things served their purpose in the season they were formed, and that purpose is complete, and it is time for them to be released. But what remains, and what is genuinely worth keeping, is the depth, the particular quality of depth that only comes from having been in the valley and having stayed there long enough to learn its terrain. The depth of your empathy, the capacity to sit with someone in pain without flinching or rushing them toward a resolution you find more comfortable, the ability to be genuinely present with difficulty, because you have been present with your own. That depth is yours. It was forged in the wound, and it is not diminished by the healing. It is in fact enhanced by it, because the healed person carries the depth without the wound's distortions, can offer it more freely and more accurately than the still wounded person whose empathy is sometimes tangled with their own unresolved pain. What remains is the compassion, the particular quality of compassion that has no patience for the dismissal of pain, that knows from the inside how significant, unexplained, and unacknowledged suffering can be, that will not participate in the minimizing of what others carry, because it has experienced the damage that minimizing does. That compassion is a gift. It is one of the most significant things I can produce through a healed wound, and it does not require the wound to remain active in order to remain available. The compassion that comes from having been through something is not erased by the healing of it. It is purified by it, freed from the defensiveness and the need and the over-identification that sometimes complicate the compassion of someone who is still in the middle of their own pain. What remains is the wisdom, the specific things you have learned about yourself and about human nature and about what is truly important, learned not from a book or a sermon, but from the expensive education of having lived through something genuinely hard. The things you know now that you did not know before the wound came, things that have shaped your judgment and your priorities and your understanding of what matters. That wisdom is yours, and it is worth keeping, and it will serve you and the people around you for the rest of your life. The wound was a costly teacher, but it was a thorough one, and what it taught that is true does not need to be abandoned when the wound itself is released. What remains is the specific ministry that your healed wound makes possible. There are people in the world who are carrying what you have carried, who are sitting in the specific darkness you have sat in, who need someone to come to them and say, "Not, I have read about what you are experiencing, but I have been there. I know the specific texture of it. I know the particular way it presses and the particular quality of the aloneness and the particular difficulty of trying to explain it to people who have not been through it. And I am here to tell you that it does not have to be permanent. And I am here to tell you that it does not have to be permanent, that there is a way through it, that the one who is available to you. That witness is only available from someone who has actually been through it, and you are someone who has actually been through it. Your healed wound is a credential for a ministry of presence that nothing else can replicate. What remains is the story, your full story, including the hard chapters, including the wound and the years inside it, and the process of the releasing and the rebuilding. Your story in its completeness is something worth keeping, worth knowing, worth being able to tell with honesty and without shame. Not a story you are defined by, but a story you carry. A story that belongs to you and that has shaped you and that will mean something to people who hear it, who will find their own story inside yours and who will take courage from the fact that yours continued past the wound into something that was genuinely worth arriving at. Keep the story. Release the prison of it. Let it be what it is. One chapter in a life that is still being written. A chapter that is part of the whole without being the whole. A chapter that is honest and real and that I am not ashamed of, even if you have been. This is the distinction. Release the wound's power over your present and future, while keeping the wound's gifts for your purpose and your depth. Release the pain's authority while keeping the pain's wisdom. Release the prison while keeping the story. Open your hands to let the weight fall, while keeping the richness that the weight, over time, pressed into you. That is what a redeemed wound looks like. Not erased, not pretended away, transformed, used, made into something that serves life rather than diminishing it. And that transformation is exactly what I am doing in you right now. I want to speak about what happens in your relationships as the releasing progresses, because the wound did not only affect your interior life, it shaped the entire relational world around you. And as the wound releases, that relational world begins to shift in ways that can be both wonderful and disorienting simultaneously. Wonderful, because things become possible that were not possible before. Disorienting, because the relationships in your life were organized around the wounded version of you, and as that version changes, the relational dynamics that were built around it have to reorganize, and reorganization, even towards something better, involves a period of uncertainty and adjustment that can feel destabilizing before it feels like freedom. The first shift you will notice is a change in who you are drawn to. The wound, operating as the primary organizing principle of your relational choices, drew you toward people and dynamics that were familiar to it, that confirmed its beliefs about what relationships produce, that fit the pattern of what you had already experienced. This is not a character flaw. It is simply how human beings work. We are drawn toward the familiar, even when the familiar is painful, because familiarity at least carries the comfort of predictability. The known wound is less frightening than the unknown good. And so the wound populated your relational world with relationships that reinforced it, relationships that replicated in some form the original dynamics that produced the wound in the first place. As the wound releases, the pull toward the familiar diminishes. You will find yourself less interested in the relationships that were primarily organized around the wound's logic and more drawn toward relationships that carry a different quality. Relationships that feel genuinely safe, genuinely mutual, genuinely able to hold the real you rather than only the managed version. This shift may feel like losing your taste for what you used to want, like outgrowing a context that used to feel like home. It may produce some grief of its own, because some of the relationships that were organized around the wound were also genuine and containing real love even in their dysfunction, and moving away from their familiar territory involves loss as well as gain. Let the grief be present. It does not mean you are moving in the wrong direction. It means you are moving, and movement always involves leaving something behind. The second shift is a change in how much of yourself you bring to the relationships you are in. The wounded version of you came to most relationships partially, managing what was revealed, presenting the portions of yourself that felt safe to present, while keeping the most tender and most real parts behind the glass. As the wound releases, the glass begins to come down, not all at once and not in every relationship simultaneously, but gradually, in the relationships where safety has been established, where the small experiments in trust have yielded evidence that the trust is warranted. You begin to bring more of yourself. You begin to risk being more fully known. And the experience of bringing more and having it received without the judgment or withdrawal you are bracing for is itself part of the healing, part of what repairs the damage the wound did to your belief that full knowing leads to rejection. I want to speak specifically to the relationships in your life that have been trying to love you through the wound, the people who have stayed and who have been doing their best with the defended version of you because it was the version that was available to them. These people deserve something, and what they deserve is not an apology for the way the wound shaped your relational capacity, because you did not choose the wound and you did not choose the defensive patterns it produced. What they deserve is the increasing availability of the real you as the healing progresses, the gradual opening of the glass wall that has been between you and them, the experience of the fuller presence you are becoming capable of as what you have been holding is released. Some of these relationships will deepen significantly as the healing progresses. Some will find that what they were organized around, the wound's particular way of connecting, does not survive the healing of it, and that the connection that made sense between two people in pain makes less sense as one of them is becoming whole. Both of these outcomes are possible, and both deserve to be met with honesty and without forcing the relationship to be what it no longer naturally is. And there are new relationships coming. I want to say that plainly and with full intention. The healed version of you, or the healing version, the you that is increasingly freed from the wound's limitations and increasingly able to be genuinely present, will attract different people than the wounded version attracted. People who are themselves oriented toward wholeness, toward genuine connection, toward the kind of relationship where both people can be fully known and fully accepted simultaneously. These relationships are not yet all visible to you because the person you are becoming is not yet fully visible. And the relationships I have in mind for that person are being prepared for the version of you that is emerging. They are coming. They are part of the rebuilding, and they will feel different from what you have known. Different in the way that true safety always feels slightly unfamiliar at first to someone who has lived primarily in the familiarity of the wound. Let them feel unfamiliar. Let yourself be curious about the unfamiliarity rather than retreating from it. The unfamiliar good is still good, and you were made for it. The rebuilding of your relational world is one of the most visible and most meaningful dimensions of the whole work we are doing together. Because the interior transformation, profound as it is, becomes most fully real in the context of relationship, in the actual lived experience of being known and staying and loving and receiving love in the new ways that the healing makes possible. The relationships on the other side of the releasing are worth what the releasing costs. I have seen the quality of connection that is available to my healed children, and I want that for you, and I am moving you toward it, one layer of releasing at a time. I want to speak now about identity, about who you are in the process of becoming as the wound releases and the rebuilding takes hold. Because identity is one of the central things the wound damaged, and one of the central things I am restoring. And understanding what I am restoring it to, what the true identity looks like, that is being uncovered beneath the wound's layers, is important to the work of the releasing. Because you cannot fully let go of a false identity without something true to move into. You cannot release the self that was organized around the wound without beginning to inhabit the self that was always underneath it, the self I knew before the wound came, and that I have been holding in trust throughout everything. The wound gave you a name, not a spoken name necessarily, though sometimes it was spoken directly and harshly, but an interior name, a defining label that the wound installed in the deepest register of your self-understanding. The name might be something like not enough, or too much, or unlovable, or broken beyond repair, or the one who gets hurt, or the one who does not matter, or the one who has to earn their place. These names are not casual. They go deep. They function as the organizing principle of the self, the lens through which you interpret your own experiences, the standard against which you measure your own worth. And they are not true. They were never true. They were the wound speaking. The wound that came through damaged and limited and sometimes deliberately harmful people who did not have access to my knowledge of who you actually are. I have a different name for you. And I had it before the wound's name arrived, and I have been speaking it over you throughout the whole of your life, even in the seasons when the wound's name was so loud that mine could not be heard above it. I want to tell you some of what my name for you contains, not as a list of flattering adjectives to be held in the mind, but as a truth to be received in the interior, to be allowed to go down to the level where the wound's name has been living, and to begin the slow work of displacing it, that could not have been shaped any other way. Not because I designed the wound, I did not. Not because the suffering was necessary in some cosmic accounting, but because I am the God who wastes nothing and who works in all things. And what has been working in the years of your wound is the formation of a specific capacity in you that is directly connected to the specific purpose I have for your life. The capacity that the wound formed is the capacity to reach people who are inside what you have been inside. There are people in the world right now who are carrying what you have been carrying, who are sitting in the specific darkness you have sat in, who have tried to explain their pain to the people around them and found that the words do not exist, who have been told they should be over it by now, who have been managing and performing and functioning while internally navigating something that no one around them fully understands. Those people need someone who knows the territory from the inside. They need someone who does not speak about the valley from the safety of the mountain, but who has been in the valley and who can say, I know this place. I know how it feels to be here. I know the particular ways it presses and the specific quality of the aloneness and the exhausting labor of keeping up the appearance of normalcy while something unnamed moves through you constantly. And I know that there is a way through. I know the one who helped me through, and I am here to tell you that what helped me is available to you. That witness is yours. It is the specific ministry that your healed wound makes possible, and it is not available from anyone who has not been where you have been. The theologian who has studied suffering from a distance cannot offer it. The person who has never been broken cannot offer it. The person who has been through something difficult and has bypassed the full processing of it cannot offer it with the same quality of authenticity and groundedness. But you can, because you have been through it, because you have stayed in it long enough to know it thoroughly, because you are in the process of coming through it, not by going around it, but by going all the way through it, which is the only route to the kind of knowing that makes the witness credible and the presence genuinely helpful. Your purpose is not something that begins after the healing is complete. It is not a destination you arrive at when you are fully whole and fully free. It is something that is available to you in the healing, in the middle of it, in the partial openings, in the small releases, and the incremental trust building that is happening right now. Even now, while you are still in the process, while you have not yet arrived at the other side, you carry something that is useful to others. The fact that you are in the process of releasing what wounded you, the fact that you have not given up, the fact that you are still reaching for healing even after all the time it has taken, is itself testimony that is worth giving. The person who is one step further into the healing than someone else is equipped to help that person take the next step. You do not need to be fully healed to be helpful. You need to be honestly in the process. And as the healing deepens, as more of the wound is released and more of the rebuilding takes shape, the purpose will expand and clarify. What begins as one person being present for another person in the same kind of pain becomes, over time, a broader ministry of presence and understanding and honest witness that reaches further than you can currently see. I am not telling you this to put pressure on you, to hurry the healing so that the purpose can begin. I am telling you because I want you to understand that the releasing is not only for your sake, it is for theirs too, the people who are waiting for the witness that only your healed story can give. Your willingness to go through this, to stay in the process rather than settling for management, to open your hands and let me rebuild what remains, is not a private act. It is an act that has consequences beyond you. Consequences that will reach people whose names you do not yet know, in seasons that have not yet arrived, through the specific ministry of presence that your healed wound is going to make possible. This is what the wound is becoming. This is what the releasing is making room for. Not just your freedom, though your freedom matters enormously and is worth every bit of what this process costs, but the freedom and the healing and the restored purpose of everyone whose path will cross yours after this, everyone who will need what only you will be able to give, everyone who will find in your story the evidence they needed that the through is possible. Your wound is becoming your most significant qualification. Let that be part of what motivates the releasing. I want to give you a picture of what is coming, not as a fantasy or a distant hope, but as a genuine description of what becomes available as the releasing progresses and the rebuilding takes hold. Because you need to know what you are moving toward. The releasing asks something of you, and the something it asks has a cost, and costs are more bearable when the destination is visible, when there is a clear and honest picture of what is waiting on the other side of what is being paid. I want to give you that picture now, painted not with exaggeration, but with the honest and specific detail of what I have seen in the lives of my children who have walked this road before you, and who arrived at the other side of releasing what wounded them. What is coming is mornings that feel different. Not mornings without difficulty, or mornings that are exempt from the ordinary hardships of life, but mornings where the first interior note is not the wound's note, where the waking is not immediately followed by the settling of the familiar weight, the unconscious reaching for the burden to take up again, the sighing intake of breath that accompanies the body's recognition that another day of carrying is beginning. The mornings on the other side of the releasing are mornings where the first interior note is something closer to openness, to the possibility of the day, to a quiet that is not the quiet of suppression, but the quiet of genuine rest, a restedness that carries forward into the day rather than being immediately consumed by the resumption of the weight. What is coming is a different relationship with your own thoughts. The interior commentary that currently runs heavily toward the wound subjects, its familiar themes of inadequacy and danger, and the anticipation of disappointment, begins to carry different content as the wound releases its authority. Not the absence of difficult thoughts, but a different proportion, a different balance, a greater frequency of thoughts oriented toward what is possible rather than toward what is threatening, toward what is good rather than toward what confirms the wound's verdict. The interior begins to feel like a more hospitable place to live, less like a space that requires constant management, and more like a space that can be inhabited with a degree of ease and even interest. What is coming is the return of spontaneity, the capacity to respond to life as it is actually happening, rather than through the filter of the wound's interpretation of what is happening. To laugh without the internal commentary that monitors whether the laughter is appropriate. To feel without the immediate impulse to manage and contain and redirect the feeling before it surfaces too fully. To be in a conversation and be genuinely present in it, rather than simultaneously conducting the internal assessment of how you are coming across and what is safe to reveal and what needs to be kept behind the glass. The spontaneity that returns is not recklessness. It is the natural responsiveness of a person who is not spending the majority of their interior resources on wound management, and therefore has those resources available for genuine engagement with what is actually in front of them. What is coming is the capacity to receive good things without the shadow of the wound falling across them. The ability to be loved without immediately wondering when the love will change its conditions or withdraw entirely. The ability to succeed without the wound immediately supplying reasons why the success is temporary or undeserved or likely to be followed by a proportional failure. The ability to be happy without the internal voice that says, do not settle into this too fully, because something is about to take it away. The receiving of good things cleanly, without the distorting filter of the wound's predictions, is one of the most practically significant changes that the healing produces, and it changes the entire texture of daily experience, because good things happen every day, and the inability to receive them fully has been impoverishing your life quietly and consistently for a very long time. What is coming is a different quality of prayer, not the desperate reaching of someone who is primarily bringing me the ongoing crisis of the wound, though that reaching was real, and I received it, and it mattered. A different quality, the prayer of someone who is increasingly settled, who comes to me not only in crisis, but in the ordinary moments of the day, who finds me not only in the loud places of need, but in the quiet places of genuine connection, who is capable of the kind of unhurried resting in my presence, that the wound, with its constant demands on the interior's resources, was making difficult. The prayer life on the other side of the releasing is deeper and quieter and more mutual than what has been available while the wound was the primary interior reality. It is the prayer of someone who is becoming genuinely at home in my presence, rather than visiting it when the urgency requires. What is coming is the specific life I always intended for you, not a generic good life. Not a life that is simply better than the wounded one, but the particular life that was designed for the particular you, the you that I knew before the wound came, and that I have been working through the wound to restore and deepen and bring forward into its full expression. That life includes relationships I have been preparing, purposes I have been shaping, experiences of joy and meaning, and genuine contribution that have been waiting for the version of you who has gone through this process and emerged from it with everything the process produces. It is a life worth the releasing. It is a life worth the grief and the trust building and the daily practices and the imperfect, repeated choosing of openness over holding. I have seen it. I know what is waiting. And it is good. It is genuinely, specifically, particularly good for you, the you I made and know and love and am restoring. Keep going. What is coming is worth it. I want to speak directly now, with nothing withheld, into the specific things that have been holding you back from opening your hands. I want to take each of the wound's primary claims and address them one by one with what is actually true, because the releasing happens not only in the emotional and spiritual dimensions, but in the interior conversation, in the specific counter-narrative that truth speaks into the place where the lie has been living. Receive each of these slowly. Let the ones that land stay with you. Let the ones that produce a response, whether that response is relief or resistance or grief or recognition, be present without immediately moving past them. The response is the truth, reaching somewhere real. To the wound's claim that what was done to you defines what you are worth, I say, the wound does not have the authority to issue verdicts on your worth. Your worth was established before the wound arrived and has not been changed by anything that happened after it. What was done to you was done to someone of extraordinary value. The doing of it did not determine the value. It violated it. And the violation of something precious does not diminish the precious thing. It is evidence of the wrongness of the violation. To the wound's claim that releasing it means pretending it did not matter, I say releasing it is the most honest acknowledgement possible that it mattered enormously. You do not release nothing. You release something real and heavy and significant. The very cost of the releasing is testimony to the weight of what you have been carrying, and therefore to the reality and the significance of what was done to you. The release honors the wound by treating it as something serious enough to require genuine work to let go of. To the wound's claim that you are too far in to come out, I say there is no depth of wound that is beyond the reach of my healing. I have reached people who had been carrying what you are carrying for twice as long. I have found what seemed like permanent damage and restored it. I have reached into places that had been sealed for decades and brought life back to them. Distance from healing is not a fixed property of the wound. It is a condition that changes as the conditions around it change, and I am changing the conditions right now, in this moment, in the specific interior landscape of your life. To the wound's claim that you cannot trust what comes after the releasing, because you have been disappointed before, I say the previous disappointments were real, and the pain of them was real, and I do not minimize them. And I'm also asking you to notice that those disappointments came from sources that were limited and fallible and unable to sustain what they promised. I am not limited. I do not make promises. I do not keep. What I am building in the space that the releasing creates is built by my hands on my foundation, and what I build does not collapse the way what they built collapsed. Test me. I can sustain the testing. To the wound's claim that the self that would exist after the releasing is unknown and therefore threatening, I say, I know that self completely. I have known them since before you were formed. They are not a stranger to me, even if they feel like a stranger to you right now. And I am telling you that what I know about them is good, not perfect, not exempt from the ongoing need for me and for growth, and for the continued work of becoming, but good. Genuinely, specifically, particularly good. The unknown self is someone worth becoming. I have seen them. I am asking you to trust. My seeing, even when your own seeing, cannot yet reach that far. To the wound's claim that the people who should have helped you and did not means that help is not available, I say the people who failed you were not the final word on what is available to you. They were limited and wounded, and in some cases, deliberately harmful, and their failure to provide what you needed was a failure of theirs, and not an accurate measure of what exists. I exist. I have not failed you in the way they failed you. I have not been absent in the way they were absent. I have been present through everything, available through everything, and I am available now in the specific form of this invitation, asking you to bring me what they could not hold and to let me demonstrate that I am not what they were. To the wound's claim that you do not deserve the rebuilding, I say deserving is not the currency I operate in. I do not rebuild the healed because they earned it, and withhold rebuilding from the wounded because they have not. I rebuild because I am a rebuilder, because restoration is my nature, because I look at what is broken and I see what it was always meant to be, and I move toward that vision with everything I have. You do not have to deserve the rebuilding. You only have to be willing to receive it. And you're receiving these words. You're staying with them. Your willingness to let them go deeper than the surface is itself the beginning of the receiving I am asking for. To the whole of you, the person who has been holding what wounded them for longer than it was ever meant to be held, I say, it is time. Not because you are fully ready, because full readiness is not what I require. Not because the wound has finished doing all the damage it could do, because there is no perfectly timed moment of release, but because you are here in this moment, having received these words, and something in you has been moved by them, and the movement is the readiness, however partial. Open your hands, even slightly, even imperfectly, even with the fear still present. Open them toward me and let me show you what I do with what you release. I want to pray over you now. I want to speak a declaration into everything we have addressed together in this time, a prayer that reaches into each dimension of the releasing and the rebuilding, and speaks something living and active and specific into it. Let this not be words passing over you from the outside, but words landing in the interior, finding the specific places they were aimed at, doing the work they were sent to do. Receive each declaration as something addressed to you specifically, in your specific situation, with full knowledge of what you have been carrying, and full commitment to what comes after you release it. I speak to the wound and I declare that its season of authority over this person is ending. Not the memory of it, not the wisdom it produced, not the depth it forged, but the authority. The wound's right to organize the present around the past, to issue verdicts about worth and possibility and safety, to function as the primary lens through which this person interprets their experience. That authority is being revoked. I am taking back what the wound claimed without entitlement. I am restoring to this person what the wound took without right. The wound served its purpose in survival. Its purpose is complete, and I am now establishing a new organizing principle for this life, which is not the wound, but me, not the pain, but the truth, not what was done to them, but what I say about them. I speak to the anger that has been compressed inside the holding, and I give it permission to be brought to me honestly. I declare that I can receive the anger without being threatened by it, without punishing it, without requiring it to be cleaned up before it is presented. Bring me the raw anger. Bring me the fire of the injustice and the heat of the years of carrying what was done to you without adequate acknowledgement. I receive it. I hold it. I am not afraid of it, and I am doing with it what only I can do. I am transforming it from a fuel that burns the one who carries it into a clarity that knows what matters and what does not, into a righteous indignation that serves justice rather than consuming the just. I speak to the grief that has been underground, the mourning that never had permission, the losses that were never acknowledged as losses, the things that were taken and never properly mourned. I give permission now. I declare this a safe place for the full weight of the grief to be felt, for the losses to be named, for the mourning to be done, in my presence with my witness and my compassion surrounding every moment of it. Grieve here. Let it be complete, and know that I am not watching the grief impatiently, not measuring it against a timeline, not waiting for it to be over so we can move on. I am present in it with you for as long as it needs to run. I speak to the false identity, to the name the wound gave this person, and I declare it displaced. I declare that the wound does not have the final word on who this person is. I have the final word. I am the one who formed them, and I am the one who knows them completely, and I am the one whose verdict on their worth is the only verdict that carries permanent authority. And my verdict is this: beloved, worthy, intentional, designed with purpose, held with care, known completely, and loved completely simultaneously. That is my name for this person, and I am speaking it into every place the wound's name has lived, every room in the interior where the false label has been operating, every morning where they woke up and the wound's assessment of them was the first thing they felt. I replace it. My name now. Mine. I speak to the self-protection, and I declare its gradual and safe dismantling, not the reckless removal of all protection at once, but the wise and discerning process of replacing walls with boundaries, replacing fear-based distance with wisdom-based discernment, replacing the indiscriminate exclusion of everything with the thoughtful welcoming of what is genuinely safe and the clear limiting of what is genuinely harmful. I declare that this person is gaining the capacity to tell the difference, to trust their own perception of what is safe and what is not, to bring the wound's hypervigilance down to the level of wisdom and to live from that level rather than from the level of maximum alert. I speak to the body and I declare release. I speak to every place where the wound has been held physically, every site of chronic tension and unexplained fatigue and suppressed feeling, and I declare the body a participant in this healing. I speak to the nervous system that has been on alert for too long and I say, rest. The threat has passed. The one who holds you is stronger than what you have been bracing against. You are safe to release the bracing. You are safe to breathe fully. You are safe to rest in a way that is genuinely restful, to descend into the restoration that was designed for you and that the wound has been preventing. Let the body begin to release what the spirit is releasing. Let the physical participate in the spiritual. Let the whole of this person, body and soul and mind, begin to open. I speak to the future and I declare it good, not exempt from difficulty, not free from the ongoing need for me, but genuinely good. Specifically good, particularly tailored to this person, to who they are and what they have been through and what they are becoming. I declare the purpose intact. I declare the calling alive. I declare the relationships coming, the ones that are prepared for the version of this person who is emerging through this healing. I declare the mornings changing, the interior quieting, the capacity for joy returning, the spontaneity and the presence and the genuine delight that have been compressed by the wound beginning to breathe again as the wound releases. And over all of this I declare my presence, unwavering, specific, personal. Not the presence of a God who is generally available to humanity in some distributed and impersonal way, but my presence with this person, in this moment, in the specific interior landscape of their specific life, knowing every detail of what they have been carrying and every dimension of what I am building in its place. I am here. I have always been here. I am not going anywhere. And what I have begun in this person I will complete. Not because they have earned the completing, because they are mine and I do not leave my work unfinished. I will complete it. Every layer, every room, every false name, every wound, down to the root, up to the surface, all the way through. Because that is who I am, and because this person is worth it, and because the life that is waiting on the other side of the releasing is too good to be left unbuilt. Support this ministry through the link given below. Every person who receives these words and begins to open their hands is someone whose life and whose witness will touch others. Your support makes the finding of them possible. We have arrived at the end of this time together, and I want to close not by summarizing what has been said, but by sending you forward with everything that has been spoken over you, still active, still working, still doing what it was sent to do in the interior places it was aimed at, because this is not the conclusion of something. It is the beginning of something, or the deepening of something that was already beginning, and I want to send you into that beginning with clarity about what you are carrying now that you did not have when you arrived here. You came to these words carrying something you were not meant to carry this long. The tachus, and I want you to notice, as you prepare to leave them, what has shifted in how you are holding it. Not necessarily lighter yet, not necessarily resolved or released in any complete sense, but perhaps held differently, perhaps held with slightly more awareness of what it actually is and where it actually came from, perhaps held with slightly more honesty about the cost of continuing to hold it, perhaps held with the beginning of a willingness to consider what opening your hands might actually look like, a willingness that was not as present when you began. If any of that is true, something has happened here. Something real has moved, and I want you to honor that movement rather than dismissing it because it is not yet complete. I want to say something about what happens now in the days immediately following this encounter, because the days immediately following a significant encounter tend to be the most vulnerable ones. The wound will reassert itself. The familiar patterns will resume. The interior noise will return. The declarations that felt so real and so landing in this moment will begin to feel more distant as the emotion of the encounter fades and the ordinary texture of life reasserts itself. And in that reassertion, in the gap between what was felt here and what is felt then, the wound's voice will offer its familiar commentary. That was just words. Nothing has really changed. You are the same person you were before you began reading. The releasing you imagined is not something you are actually capable of. I want you to know that voice is coming, so that when it arrives, you are not surprised by it and do not take it as truth. What was real here is still real when the feeling of it fades. The declarations spoken over you do not expire when the emotion of receiving them diminishes. The truth about who you are and what I am building and what is available to you on the other side of releasing what you have been holding is not a feeling. It is a reality that exists independent of whether you can feel it clearly on any given day. You're returning to it. You're choosing to bring it back to mind in the moments when the wound is loudest. Your decision to take the small steps of the daily practices, even when the larger vision feels distant, that is not wishful thinking. That is the anchoring of your life to something that does not move. I want to give you one thing to carry from this time, one sentence to return to when you need something concrete to hold. It is this: I am letting go of what wounded me, and I am trusting God to rebuild what remains. Not as a declaration of completion, not as a claim that the releasing is finished or the rebuilding is done, but as a statement of direction, of the way you are choosing to be oriented, of the posture you are choosing to inhabit, even when the posture feels imperfect and the holding is still more present than the releasing. Say it in the mornings when the weight settles back in. Say it in the moments when the wound's voice is loudest. Say it when the familiar patterns reassert themselves and you catch yourself gripping what you are trying to open your hands from. Not as a magic formula, but as a returning to the direction you have chosen, a reorientation toward the releasing, even when the releasing is only partial, even when it is only a loosening, even when it is only the intention to loosen that is not yet fully translated into the opening. I want to say one last thing about the rebuilding, the specific rebuilding I am doing in you right now, in this moment, even as you receive these final words. I am not waiting for the releasing to be complete before I begin. I am building even now in the partial openings, in the loosened grip, in the willingness you have demonstrated by being here and receiving this. Every small act of trust gives me something to work with. Every moment of honest bringing gives me access to a room in your interior that was previously closed. Every imperfect and tentative step in the direction of openness creates conditions in which the rebuilding can advance. I am a God who builds with what is available, not with what is ideal. And what you have given me in this time, your presence, your willingness to receive, the small movements of your heart toward the releasing, is enough. It is enough to build from. It is enough to begin. Go forward from here with your hands slightly more open than they were. Go forward with the knowledge that what you release does not fall into emptiness, but into my hands. Hands that are large enough to hold everything you have been carrying and skilled enough to build something extraordinary from what remains. Go forward knowing that the self that is emerging through this process is someone worth becoming. Someone I have known and loved from the beginning and am now, finally, with your permission, beginning to build into their full expression. Go forward knowing that I am with you in this, not as an observer or a commentator, but as the active presence who is doing the work in the interior, who is present in the releasing and in the rebuilding, and in every ordinary day between now and the day when you stand in the full freedom of what this process has been producing. You are not alone. You are not behind. You are not beyond the reach of what I can do with what remains. You are mine, and I rebuild what is mine, completely, carefully, lovingly, all the way down to the root and all the way up to the surface. until what was wounded is not simply patched, but genuinely new, genuinely whole, genuinely the life I always had in mind for you. Let go. Let me rebuild. That is all. That is everything. And it is enough. Support this ministry through the link given below. These words were written for the person who is ready to open their hands, and your generosity ensures they are found.